Let's see. Here we are again. Business Agility Live. Welcome to the show. And this time with us, Mick Levin, Manuel Cana on the team. My name is Mike Laber, and I'm happy we are having a great guest today. It's Evan Leyburn. Welcome, Evan.
Good morning, afternoon, or in my case, evening.
And I'm happy we are having a great guest today. It's Evan Leyburn. Welcome, Evan. Yeah, I think there was just a second something live on my side. Evan, you're the founder of the Business Agility Institute, and that's quite a thing since quite a while now. I think since 4 years. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe, and maybe a little bit about the institute.
So we started the institute. It's 3 years old, not 4. It started almost by accident. We had a vision that there was a need to support the community, that this thing which we called business agility was being overtaken by various consulting firms and trainers, and I love consultants and trainers. I was one myself, but there needed to be some independence around that. So at the end of 2017, this is actually after the first Business Agility conference in New York, I took the initiative. We put together the first we put together the plan for the Business Agility Institute, and we launched. I will admit, what we created isn't quite what we started. We have adapted a few times. We certainly started with the idea of creating a community organization and a big sort of video library. What we've ended up creating is a community organization, but also a research organization. So we spend a lot of our time actually doing quite deep and quite rigorous research. So this has been fun. It's been a really, really great couple of years, and the future is just getting brighter.
Right. So that's quite interesting. And, the term business agility is already something that seems to be quite interesting for many people out there. I'm not sure if everybody knows already what agile means. And there's a big debate on, big A, small a, attaching to the manifesto, or is it something else? Now, what is business agility then, in your view? Is that, I'm a little bit blunt now, right? Is that just another hype here, or, what are we up to?
Oh, look, just because something's popular doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? So but you're right. And one of the reasons we exist is to try and push back against some of the hype. For those listening, obviously you have capital A Agile, which is the methods and practices, as well as some of the values and principles that emerged out of software in the early 2000s. Of course, that is built upon what came before, coming out of the 80s and the 90s, and then even going further back into the 40s and 50s, coming out of manufacturing. So to be honest, there is nothing new on this planet. It's just new ways of thinking about old things. Agility from a software perspective has been well known and well discussed for at least 15 years, if not more. The idea that you can't just do agile, you have to be agile. And when we look at software teams, which, and obviously this isn't just software, but quite often that's where it starts. When we look at software teams, mature, agile software organizations have huge advantages in terms of their adaptability, their ability to respond to market changes, and all that sort of wonderful stuff. But then we look broader, and for those who have heard me talk about it, I often talk about Evan's theory of agile constraints, with apologies to Eli Goldratt. So if we look, so theory of constraints, if you don't know, is if you have a production line, let's say you're building a car, somewhere in that production line is a constraint. Let's say it's the engine team. It doesn't matter how much you transform the door team if the engine team is your constraint. So you have to improve the engine team first. But the corollary to theory of constraints is that there is always a constraint. So once you've optimized the engine team, you now need to find the new constraint, and now maybe it's the doors, in which case you have to optimize the doors. Now extend that into agility, and you can only be as agile as your least agile division, and that's not software anymore. So agile, great for doing agile. Agility in the context of software, really good in a focused, narrow area of your business. But once you've got agility going really well inside software, you're going to find that your constraint to agility is no longer that software team. It is finance or sales or marketing or HR or compliance or governance. There's some other part of the organization that is the constraint. And so business agility is now looking, and in fact, forget software altogether now, because we're seeing this now in organizations back in manufacturing, or we have a really great case study from a pulp paper processing factory. Try saying that 5 times fast. And like the closest they come to software is Excel, right? And yet they've got this concept of agility throughout every single part of their organization. They don't call it that, but that's how it works. So business agility is looking at an entire organization as a complex adaptive system and looking at how it all fits together in an agile, adaptable, emergent, humane, empathic kind of way.
All right.
So maybe, Evan, a lot of companies, they start with adopting a framework. They adopt Scrum, they adopt Kanban, they adopt SAFe. These all lead them to a certain place, generally, as you said, with the software department, or in a manufacturing environment. Maybe they've come from Lean and they've adopted Kanban along the way. What's the difference between adopting a framework, saying we're agile, to getting to that true business agility? How is it we close the gap between the two?
So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So starting with a goal in mind is critical in any kind of organization or organizational transformation. If your goal is to be faster at building a software product, you're a software organization. All right. Well, that tells you where you need to start. If your goal is to reduce employee attrition, all right, or employee turnover, all right. If your goal is to sell more widgets, that's another place. So where you start depends very, very much on the goal that you have. However, let me be a little bit more prescriptive. There are a couple of easy wins, well, I suppose hard wins, but obvious wins. One of the key areas that I very often advise organizations to focus in on is their governance processes. So forget software. This has nothing to do with developing a product. This is about a business and how a business can be adaptable, responsive, empathic. If all of your organizational KPIs or OKRs or whatever system you want to use is focused on financial measures, how many widgets did we sell this quarter? Then every behavior that you're going to have in your organization is going to be geared towards achieving those financial measures at the expense of everything else. Now, that might sound fine if it's like, yeah, of course we want to sell more widgets. How is that not a good thing? But the problem is that that is usually a short-term view. So we want to sell as many widgets as we can this quarter, as opposed to building a sustainable growth business over a longer term. So if you incentivize that short-term financial growth, you will get it, but at the expense of your organizational stability in the long term. And we see that right now here in the COVID-19 crisis. Organizations have over-indexed in efficiency. Right? They have leaned out their supply chain to such an extent that a disruption in that supply chain has crippled them as organizations. And there are other organizations who have, yes, they focus on leaning out, they've reduced efficiencies, but they've still developed that ability as an organization to focus on other things that are important, such as employee welfare or customer centricity. They've built KPIs that focus on experimentation or innovation, not just efficiency, cost reduction, and revenue. And so because they've got these other facets to their organizational measurements, they also have these facets to their organizational culture. And what you measure matters, and you will get the behavior that you measure. So because they have this more comprehensive organizational culture, these organizational measures, they're much more resilient to any kind of market disruption.
So then, in relation to this COVID-19 and the kind of crisis that companies go through, we've seen a lot of companies react. They've reacted kind of harshly to it. What do you think the outcome of that is for those organizations? So they survive today, but what's the ongoing issue that arises in an organization after that?
So that's a very good question, and we see that. This actually leads on to a topic that's very important to us. So as an organization, we're actually about to launch a new conference called Emerging from Crisis. And I want to sort of highlight two key points. One is this isn't the first crisis that companies have faced. Is it the big one? Yes, of course it is. But it is not the first one. Global financial crisis, Arab Spring, 9/11. These kinds of disruptive events have hit companies quite significantly in not just in a generation, in like the last 5 and 10 years. So what we should be doing is actually looking to those organizations and what they did back in 2008 or 2001, what they did through any of these other crises, and go, what was the difference between a company that came out of that crisis stronger, or as strong as possible, the best possible version of that company, versus the kind of organization that came out of the crisis a shadow of their former selves. And if there are some really good examples coming out of the military, coming out of companies, those airlines that came out stronger compared to their competitors who went bankrupt. It's what were those characteristics? In brief, it was agility, right, at an organizational level, whether they called it business agility or not. They were adaptable. It was the ability to change strategy, right? It was the ability to inspire confidence in their customers, right? And that customer obsession, that customer centricity is so important, especially in times of crisis, because it's your customers who will stand by you, who will come back when things get a little bit better, and they're the ones who will forgive you for those transgressions that you've got to do in order to survive during those times of crisis. Whereas a company who takes their customers for granted, well, the customers will go somewhere else.
Thank you.
What is quite interesting, I mean, you just mentioned it before, like, it's not only about software. I'm just thinking, my camera is off, but that's a life thing, doesn't matter. I think you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
You're beautiful. So if the game is a bigger one, and I think the Business Agility Institute, which you've been working on, I think the audience is also a different one you're talking to, right? It's probably not so much software developers, agile coaches. It's probably more managers, responsible people, entrepreneurs, people who are responsible for the business. How do they recognize business agility, especially maybe nowadays compared to a year ago or so? Do you recognize the difference now, in terms of, hey, we need to look after our business, and there can be a lot of stuff, right? Because maybe people might now say, hey, we need to come back to life again first. agility is not important. We need to start selling again. We need to, make the cash flow again. What do you see here? What notions do you see?
So there's a couple of things in play. So the first is, for the last 3 years, I would say 2 to 3 years, we're seeing a much greater awareness and need at an executive level for business agility. We're seeing top executives in banks, in healthcare organizations, in manufacturing firms look at what is. We have case studies in our library from, as I mentioned, like a pulp paper factory in India. Right? We have case studies from government organizations, the Post Office of New Zealand, or the Postal Service of New Zealand, case studies from at least 6 different banks. Right? Are they doing it perfectly? No, nobody is. Right? But everyone is on the journey, and there's a recognition from companies all over the world that you need to be on that journey. And it's a long journey, it's a hard journey, but if you're not on it, then, well, you will be left behind. If we look at if we look at failure, however, the failure comes at the same level. So where business agility journeys, transformations fall apart is often from those very same executives. And a couple of different reasons. Number one, the board of directors. You might have a CEO or a CTO or a CFO who believes in business agility and is inspired and is pushing the organization down this path. But if the board don't understand it, and to be frank, the board, they're the furthest people from the customer. Right? And so quite often what the board sees is very different to what the people in the organization actually see about the market and about the customers, the organization's customers. So if the board don't understand or value agility in the organization, then when things go poorly, and because everyone's got a bad quarter, they kick out the CEO, or the CEO retires and a new one comes in. If the board isn't selecting their executives for agility, then the whole thing will come undone. And we've seen this in numerous organizations around the world over the last 10 years. The other element here that's at play is around, I call it energy levels. So think about like high school chemistry. You put chemicals together, and I'm not a chemist, so I'm doing this from memory. So if you're a chemist, forgive me. But each chemical reaction has a sort of an energy state, right? And you put energy in until it hits that state, and then it is stable at that state, right? And if you stop putting energy in before it reaches that new plateau, that new state, it falls back to the previous state, right? Chemicals come apart and compounds come apart and all that kind of stuff. Again, forgive me, I'm not a chemist. But what does this mean for leadership? Right? It means leaders may be inspired by agility, right? But everything that they've learned, right, from Harvard or INSEAD has taught them a particular style of management, which is their default state. Right? So they want to be agile and they're inspired and they go for it, but then something happens. Right? Maybe they get a bad quarter. Maybe they don't meet their sales targets for that month. Right? Maybe that they get some feedback that doesn't make them feel good. Right? Something happens. Right? And so the energy pushing them up to that next state goes away, and they fall straight back down. And we see that in organizations where if you don't keep the energy going in, right, then the transformation is undone. And unfortunately, it is a waste of money. It is a waste of effort. All the effort that goes into transforming that organization, you may as well not have started in the first place. And of course, all the benefits therein also disappears. We actually discovered this in the last year's Business Agility Report, when we looked at how long it took for organizations to become stable and mature. One of the things that we found was that on average, it took and I'm not exaggerating, 8 years for an organizational transformation to be sustainable. That's not entirely true. There are some facets of the transformation that are sustainable much earlier. For example, customer centricity is sustainable very quickly, right? But an entire organizational change takes on average 8 years. The size of that is dependent on the size of the company and a few other factors, but for most companies, I think plan for 8 years.
Tell us a little bit about the report you just mentioned, because I think that's very, very, very interesting. You know, because this whole agile thing, we're talking a lot about stuff and individual cases, but there is no really thorough research. And I think that's where you're doing a lot of work now, right? Maybe tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've just quickly shared. So this is the business agility report. If you can see my screen. Right. This you can download for free from the website, and we'll share the links in the show notes. But this report is based on surveys of. Oh, hang on, I can tell you exactly. It is 274 companies and 453 people. It looks at what they are seeing in their organization. It looks at the benefits and the challenges that they're seeing. One of the most valuable insights we got from this report, we actually found by accident. If I may, there we go. So as an organization, we use a number of data scientists and experts. Mm-hmm. We gave the business agility report data, the survey data to these data scientists. Great company here in Australia called Orchestrated. Okay. And what they did is they looked at correlations, causations, all this kind of wonderful stuff. And then out of the blue, they sent me an email. It's like, hey, Evan, we've looked at this. We've gone through the hypothesis that you gave us, and here's what we have found. And that's fine. It's like, oh, by the way, we've also found these 3 key predictive indicators. Is this important? And I was like, drop everything else. This is the most important thing that we can report on in terms of this report. Because what we did discover was, based on these nearly 500 respondents, we know what it takes for a transformation to be successful, right? And the top 3 predictive indicators of a transformation success are funding models, value streams, and a culture of relentless improvement. So this means if you're running an organizational-wide transformation and you haven't touched your finance department, you haven't touched how you fund work, then you're at a much worse position in terms of your chance of success than those organizations that transform the finance department, if not first, but at least early on in the process. So there's some really great insights in the report. You can download it. So strongly recommend.
That's quite interesting, Evan. Related to when you were showing these reports, these indicators, leads me to ask you a question around the domains of business agility, right? And that's one fascinating subject when you are actually looking from a business agility within the organization, or organizational agility as a whole, apart from the business itself. When we are talking about the business agility, what they are for anybody who wants to, understand or learn about it, and also how do you think it is going to affect and change the way businesses are looking to be agile, or probably get started on their agile journey?
So we developed the domains. It actually predates the Institute. So we actually started, the first version of the domains is about 3 years old. We're up to version 3.1, right? Because everyone's got to have a minor increments in all products. We developed the domains because I got sick and tired of people asking me, what is business agility? And I used to give them this trite answer. Business agility is the ability for an organization to adapt to a changing or unpredictable marketplace. It's a fair definition. It's not wrong, but it's also trite. It's incomplete. So what we did is, actually, it's a funny story. So it actually started as nothing more than a blog post. I sort of wrote out, like, this is what I think the domains of business agility are, right? And on this particular day, I happened to be going into surgery, just into day surgery. All's fine. So I put it out on LinkedIn, just this Google Doc, and I say, look, I've got this idea of what I think the different domains of business agility are. If you want to have a read, add a few comments, and let me know what you think. I'll be publishing this tomorrow. And so I go into surgery, I come out, and of course, what's the first thing you do? You check your email. And I was looking, and I logged in, and there is this comment war occurring in this Google Doc. People are arguing about definitions of things, suggesting things. There were 60 people who were having this very robust conversation. So what started as nothing more than a blog post turned into almost a 3-month community consultation as we engaged and we spoke to people. And what we ended up with was what we defined as not a framework, nothing to say how to do business agility, because there is 1,000 different ways of doing it, but a model specifically looking at the characteristics of an agile organization. Those elements that if you are missing, right, then as an organization, you are, to be blunt, fundamentally flawed. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I had this ready before the call, but for some reason, there it is. Share screen. For those of you who haven't seen it, these are the domains. There are 13 domains, starting with the customer at the center. Right? This is why you're in business. Around the outside, you've got who. These are the three domains, the 3 people who need to be agile. Your board, for all the reasons I explained earlier, your organizational partners, your vendors, your suppliers, your distributors, because again, you're only as agile as your least agile part. And if you're a really agile organization, but your suppliers are not, then that's your constraint, and then your workforce. And then around that, we have the 3 domains of leadership, the 3 domains of individuals, and the 3 domains of operations, right, which each look at specific characteristics of what it means to be agile at an organizational level. And I like to call this the don't forget model, because if you're running a transformation, these are the different elements of your organization that you can't forget. And sadly, too many organizations do.
Beautiful.
Cool. Evan, I have a question maybe around, you talked about a lot of the things that will help you get to business agility. You've talked about finance departments, you've talked about now operations and your supply chain constraints, etc. What would you say is the most important bit in the secret sauce, the most important ingredient in delivering an agile journey for a company? That's a tough one, I know.
That is a tough one. So I'll go back to my answer earlier about KPIs. Right? Changing organizational measures is one of the first things you've got to do. You get the behavior that you measure. But I'll also expand that a little bit, and there's got to be a vision. Right? We don't want to be an agile organization because it's fun. Right? Business agility is hard work. It's hard work to get there, and it means we need an organization that is engaged. And quite often we come to work and it's just like, oh, I've got my job to do. I know exactly what I have to do, and I'm going to do it. Agility means that when you come into work, you have a goal, an outcome. Right? but you've actually got to think about how you're going to achieve it. It's not necessarily the easiest way of working, right? It is definitely a better way of working in most cases, but it's not necessarily easy. So you can't just go to an organization and say, thou shalt be agile. And here is a consulting firm and a framework, and away you go. Suddenly, magic happens. Rather, the organization has to have a coherent, inspiring vision, right? We are on this journey because we are aiming to be something better, right? What is it that this organization needs? Now, survival can be a burning platform. So we need to become an agile organization because we'll be out of business in 5 years or in 3 years or in 1 year if we don't. It's not a good reason to change. And to be honest, if you're transforming because of survival, you're probably transforming too late. You probably should have transformed a couple of years ago. But survival can be that motivating factor. Better still is something more intrinsic, right? What is it inside the beliefs and the heart of the employees that drives them? And we look at companies around the world with absolutely beautiful cultures, right? USAA, Southwest Airlines, Virgin. These are companies whose staff have a very clear vision of why they come to work, right? And they love coming to work. So if you can develop that coherent vision of we're doing this so that, right, we can better serve our customers, and not just in a trite mission statement kind of way, but in a very tangible, very clear way. More than just we're doing this so that we can survive, but we're doing this because we want to be a better place to work. We want you as an employee to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, as Dan Pink says, right? So if you can create a vision, and it's a personal vision, it's not something, I can't tell you the vision, right? If you can create that vision inside your organization, you don't need to transform anybody. You don't need to impose a transformation and go, thou shalt change. But instead, it becomes something that is inspired, and it is driven intrinsically by the very people who themselves need to be agile.
So if I understand correctly, the ingredient is engagement, but how we create that engagement is another secret sauce.
Well, it is a unique sauce. It is the 11 secret herbs and spices. Okay. Here's the sad truth, right? You cannot create how to put this? An organization is a complex adaptive system, right? I can create a framework for a process, right? The software development process, Scrum, right? The production process, the budgeting process, the marketing process. These are things that can be defined, documented, and generally moved from one organization to another, right? Great. But this is why we can create frameworks, because I can create a framework for that process, right? Copy it to another organization and go, here's this thing, and let's call it Scrum. It works really well for me. And it's like, yeah, with a bit of changing around the edges, right, to those interface points, it works well for me as well. But a company is not simple. It is not obvious. It is not complicated. It is complex. Right? It's probably chaotic in most cases. Right? That organization as a complex adaptive system cannot be documented. Right? And the act of documenting changes what you're documenting. Right? It is not something that you can copy, which means at an company level, the systems of one cannot be taken as a total system and applied to another. right? And that goes for things like your vision and your mission. It goes for what is inspiring your teams, or what is inspiring your staff. That is very uniquely personal to that organization, right? And we as an we as an industry, as a community, suffer because quite often what we believe and what we share as best practice, right, at a company level, it worked well for us. Of course, it'll work well for you, right? But forgetting that systems, that systems perspective, and that each system is unique.
So brings up an interesting point. I just wanted to carry on with the thought process, Evan, which you're talking about. It's around the companies which have legacy, right? And they have been traditionally successful because of the hierarchical system which they have established in the company itself, right? So what sort of organization, agility, or what sort of agility within the organization that we're looking at, what they need to do to be more dynamic?
Do they? Do they need to be more dynamic? And here's the thing: agility isn't the right answer for every organization, nor for that matter every industry. There are two characteristics that come into play. Number one, when when the outcomes are necessarily unpredictable. If I'm in an industry where there is variation and change, and I can't necessarily predict, if I do this in the industry, this is what I'm going to get, right? That requires an adaptive strategy. That requires the organization to change and pivot. That word is way overused, right? I've heard the word pivot more time in the last two months than I have in the last 10 years, right? But it does require that organization to adapt. Now, if I can predict the market, if I do this, this is what the market's going to do. I don't need agility, right? Because let's be honest, agility is less efficient than planning if your plan is correct. Now, how many times are your plans correct? How many times is that 5-year plan being thrown out the window within 3 months of creating it, right? And to be blunt, in most industries, in most companies, that is the case. So if you exist within a protected, clear, predictable marketplace, you do not need agility. You do not want agility. It's actually the worst thing, right? In terms of the does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for those companies that are who have been successful, right? The question is, has your market changed? Right? So I have been in a protected, safe environment, taxi cabs, right? Protected, government regulated, controlled by tokens or license plates or some other mechanism, heavily controlled marketplace. Right? Uber comes in and completely out of left field ignores all the regulations, rightly or wrongly. That's another matter altogether. The industry that was safe and secure was no longer, right? So those companies that a particular approach has served them well, right? When the market changes, they need to be able to adapt. In fact, to be honest, they need to be able to adapt at least a year before the market changes, and that's the problem.
Or you might even have to have maybe a different sort of portfolio, right? I mean, I'm thinking now, for example, about the airline industry. And again, I hear many people saying, come on, I mean, this situation we currently have is so extreme, nobody could ever be prepared. Well, sure, it's easy talking now, from home. I know a few airlines who were into agile transformations over the past year. Now we talk about should any state keep them alive? Which is, again, it's the business model is currently not ready to continue. But at the same time, if we look at companies like Amazon or Tesla, for example, and we see where they're investing into, apart from what they are obviously doing, they're getting prepared for a different sort of portfolio, right? So not everybody has to shoot, I don't know, rockets to the moon or anywhere. But isn't that the thing? Aren't we currently? I mean, when you talk agility about these complex organizations, isn't that about game-changing perspectives?
It is, and my problem with coronavirus is it's made it too easy, right? And everyone agrees you need to be able to adapt because of coronavirus, COVID-19, right? The problem is when COVID-19 goes away, and it will, like the crisis will pass, right? And we'll all be let out of our houses and able to go down to coffee shops and go to restaurants and go shopping and hug our friends, right? Yeah. All of that will go back to the way it was. And yes, new normal and all that kind of stuff. Things will have changed, right? But the more things change, the more things stay the same. The problem with focusing on COVID-19 is this is as a specific, it's a good driver and motivator, right? But there are other drivers and motivators which are true every day of the year, every year, that we should also be focusing on. So those organizations that are, and those people who are looking at today, who are looking at the challenges that they're facing today, need to then look at not how do we survive the next COVID-19, right? But how do we survive the next other little thing, not the big things, the little things, right? And the airlines, right? No amount of agility is going to, there is another factor at play, bad luck or good luck, as the case may be. Some industries will win, some industries will lose. And you can't compare an airline to a bank right now, right? The banks are going up, the airlines are going down, right? Or tech firms, even better, right? Zoom's stock, airline stock, right? So all you can do is look at the airlines and go, which of those airlines are going to survive, right? And why? Or perhaps better still, which of those tech firms are going to come out of this better and stronger, right, than their competitors? Because even in a period of growth, right, not all tech firms are the same, right? So we've all seen the news articles about Zoom and the challenges that Zoom is having. Right? So do they have enough agility to be able to handle sudden growth? Now, to be fair, for the moment, they're doing pretty well. All right, but there are many other organizations who are actually unable to actually take advantage of sudden growth, not let alone the collapse of industries. Right? So it doesn't matter whether it's a positive change or a negative change. Right? Inside your industry, compared to your competitors, right? Direct or indirect competitors, how are you surviving? That's the key. Oh, no, sorry. Not how are you surviving. How are you thriving? That's the key.
Yeah. That sounds wonderful. We're coming close, actually, to the end of today's show. And we've got a new one this week together with you to dive deeper, because obviously it's also about how we're going to approach these different things. And that's obviously a lot to look at the domains, your experiences, your conversations with groups of experts out there. That brings me to my final question. Are we, in the agile, call it industry, because probably it became quite a sort of, business over the past 10, 20 years. Are we looking at the wrong, sort of communities, people, talking to, I don't know, wrong, counterparts?
We were. And one of the reasons we created the Institute is that we were. I've been doing business agility since 2008. I was calling it agile business management back then because I'm bad with names. Yeah. But the reason we created the Institute was because absolutely literally, I was in an agile conference in India, right? And a Canadian coach, a friend of mine, Ellen Grove, we were just complaining about it was a great conference, but we're just complaining that we're telling the same stories to the same people, and they all nod their heads and go, yes, this is great, we need this, but they can do nothing about it. All right, so that motivated me to create the Business Agility Conference and then the Business Agility Institute. So if we look at now, today, in 2020, right, I would say now we're finally talking to the right people. Now we're talking to the CFO. Now we're talking to the CHRO. Now we're talking to the head of governance and the head of strategy and the head of compliance, because these are the people who need agility in today's world, right? The software people needed agility back in 2001, right? Head of compliance, finance, and HR and others, they're the ones who need agility today. And finally, right, this year and last year is when we're really starting to get into those areas of the organizations. We still have a way to go, right? But we are on that path as a global community.
That is amazing, and it's been really a pleasure having had you here with us today. And again, it's everybody's opportunity, first of all, to get equipped. Here's a link to the ebook, which you published in its recent version at the Institute's website. I think there is also the report, which we already pointed to from last year. And I'm not sure, I think you've got a call out there for this year, right? So if anybody
yes, please. And actually, that is a very good point. If you do have 15 minutes, we need your insights into the 2020 Business Agility Report. It's open for another 3.5 weeks. So if you can, please take that report, share your insights, share it with your friends, right? My goal this year is to get 1,000 respondents, different companies, different insights. So I need every single one of you to help us out.
We will share the link after the show also in the teaser, and we'll have you back next Thursday this week, and we'll dive deeper into
looking forward to it.
How to do these things, how to work there, and what to consider. Thanks for being with us, and have a great remaining day. Evan, you in Australia?
Yes.
And Manoj, you already... no, actually, Evan, you're through. Manoj, you're starting. You're in New York.
Yeah.
Nick and me in Europe.
Yeah.
Take care. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Right. Thank you, my friends.
Bye-bye.